Hi there, my name is Miss Chafer. I'm the subject leader for A-level Sociology at Chesham Grammar School. Welcome to this induction lesson. Obviously, this isn't how we would ordinarily do an induction lesson, but for obvious reasons, we're unable to do it face-to-face with you. So I hope that the PowerPoint and my sort of commentary alongside it will give you a bit more of an insight into the subject. So, without further ado, I will begin. So, to begin with, we want to think about what sociology is as a subject, and hopefully you've got an idea from what you have started to do in your bridging work and from the sixth form open evening that you may or may not have attended. Sociology, then, is a social science that studies human societies and how they interact to shape people's beliefs, behaviours and identity. And at the heart of sociology is us trying to understand how people behave and, importantly, why they behave in that way. We're particularly interested in looking at patterns of behaviour and in groups or at groups of people, and we are trying to understand what influences their behaviour. So we might look at things like their family life, we might look at their involvement in criminal activity, we might look at their level of religiosity, and we would try to establish sort of some correlations between those things and people's behaviours. This slide gives you an overview of what the course is made up of. So you can see at the end of year 13 you will sit 3 separate papers. In short, there are 4 main topics in sociology, and you can see those main topics in section A of paper 1, education, section A of paper 2, families and households, section B of paper 2, beliefs in society, and section A of paper 3, crime and deviance. They are the 4 main topics that will take up the majority of our teaching time. Methods and context and theory and methods, which feature on papers 1 and 3, are smaller topics which have connections to sort of the main 4 areas. So in year 12, we spend most of the year studying education and families and households. You will look at education with Miss Horton and families and households with myself. And they're 2 really good topics to start with because they're both familiar to you. You belong to a family, you're part of the education system, and we, try to encourage you to think about these institutions that you're part of in a slightly different way to, how you may have thought about them in the past. Year 13 is largely made up of beliefs in society and crime and deviance. Again, 2 really interesting topics which have some similarities and links to the topics you study in year 12, but also offer you some, really different material, and then slightly more abstract, which, brings with it a different level of enjoyment. So we're going to get you thinking sociologically now, and we're going to ask you a number of questions to encourage you to come up with some answers that will sort of link to the topics we would be studying. So, how would your life differ if you were born 100 years ago? I'd like you to pause the presentation now and write down a few ideas and then press play again when you're ready to hear some possible answers. On this screen, you can see some suggestions of things you may have thought of when coming up with your list of possible answers to that previous question. Now, by no means do you need to have had them all. You may have some that are totally different, but we sat together and came up with a list of ideas that we felt were most likely to be in your lists. So let's have a quick look at some of them. Firstly, you've got gender roles. So we thought about how the role of women in particular would be very different 100 years ago to the role that women have in society now. Far less rights, wouldn't be able to do things like vote, for example. very few women would have many educational qualifications, and even those that did wouldn't necessarily have them to the highest standards. Also, many women were relatively confined to the home. They would have been unlikely to work. And obviously that's very different to the experiences of lots of women, particularly in the Western world today. We also talked about, if we look at point number 3, the lack of technology. I mean, that's obvious. Something like this, for example, would be, absolutely not possible at all. But technology has massively revolutionised how we live, how we interact with one another, and our whole lives. And that change has been particularly rapid in the last sort of 20 to 50 years. So technology 100 years ago would have been very, very different, and really nowhere near the standard that it is today. That we would like you to have a think about, and again, once I've read the question out, please do pause in order for you to have some time to reflect on, or write down some answers and then reflect on them. So how would your life differ if you were born into a wealthy aristocratic family? And if you're not sure about the word aristocratic, look it up so that you're able to answer the question accurately. So pause the presentation now, jot down some ideas, and then see how they compare to the ones that we came up with. So here we have a list of possible answers that we came up with. So we first of all thought about the idea that private education would be far more accessible. Obviously, private education comes with a fee. Those fees are largely, not accessible for lots of people. Top private schools can charge over £40,000 a year, which is far more than the average salary of a person in this country. So that just puts it into perspective, I suppose. So that would be much more of an option, and probably actually the likely route that your education would take. If we look at point number 5, connections to jobs and opportunities, it's likely that being born into a family like this would bring with it a number of opportunities for you to perhaps seek out work experience, for you to seek out jobs, and that would purely be based on this idea of knowing people, and that knowledge being sort of given more weighting than perhaps what you actually know. And there's a big question mark. There's obviously a concern over how fair that is, and obviously lots of people aren't in this position, or not even lots of people, the majority of people. So therefore, how can it be fair if people are getting jobs based on who they know rather than what they know? And then the question we want you to think about is this: how would your life differ if you were born into a less developed country? So if you were born in a less developed country, have a think about how life might be different to the one you're experiencing right now in a developed country. So pause the presentation, jot down some ideas, and then see how they compare. So here we have the final set of possible answers. You may have thought of the following. Let's pick a couple. So lack of healthcare or a healthcare system. We are exceptionally fortunate to live in a country where we have such a established and efficient healthcare system. We've seen it obviously being tested hugely in recent months, and it's coped brilliantly. We could also have a look at the bottom one: civil unrest or conflict or insecurity. We are very fortunate to live in a country where it's stable. We have a democratically elected government who consult as a body, and who consult its citizens about various decisions. Plenty of people sadly live in a country where that's not the case, and where there are ongoing sort of episodes of conflict in particular, and clearly that's very damaging to the country, the people themselves, the residents, the economy, etc. So, having looked at those 3 questions, you've had an opportunity to think about sort of how life is socially constructed, and that's really a key concept in sociology. So, life is not a fixed experience that everyone shares in exactly the same way. Our experiences of life are all very different and are all very dependent on where we live, when we grow up, how we grow up, and we mentioned sort of wealth being a factor there. So it just goes to show how life varies greatly. And as I said, that is, for us as sociologists, is calling it socially constructed, which means it's not a predetermined fixed experience, it's something that varies. Okay, on this slide are 4 links to articles from the BBC News website. They're 4 links to articles about very contemporary issues, things which have been in the news a lot recently, and hopefully, being young, interested citizens of the world, you keep up to date with current affairs, and the issues that are mentioned within the articles you are familiar with. So when I finish speaking, I'd like you to pause the presentation and have a look at each one. So please have a look at each article, read it through, watch any videos, have a look at any diagrams, graphs, etc. that are associated with it, and just have a think about what it's telling you. Think about links to different aspects of society. Think about links to things like social class, gender, ethnicity. Also have a think about things like family, education, crime, religion, the sort of areas that we'll be studying during the course. So please pause the presentation, click on each link separately, and have a read through, as I just said. Hopefully you found those articles interesting and they were all things you had some awareness of already. They just relate to, as I said previously, certain aspects of the course that we will go on to have a look at in a lot more detail. And I just think it's really important for you to be aware that this is a subject which has a huge amount of relevance in the 21st century, and a huge amount of relevance to the world that we are all a part of at the moment. So we are pretty much at the end of the induction lesson. Hopefully you found it interesting and you've got sort of more of an insight about the subject and about the course itself. If you have any questions, I would first and foremost direct you to the AQA Sociology website. There's lots of information on there about the course itself. Just make sure you're looking at the A-level information and not the AS, because we just do the A-level course. Alternatively, if you've got any specific questions, you're really not sure about various things, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me, and I will do my best to answer any questions you may have. So have a lovely summer, and I look forward to meeting lots of you in September. Take care. Bye.